There's a quiet shift happening in Jewish leadership. More and more women are taking up roles at the top or carving out unique leadership roles of their own creation. On Women's Gallery podcast, Joanne Greenaway, CEO of the London School of Jewish Studies, meets normal women who are also superstar trailblazers, exploring their personal journeys of discovering and growing into their leadership potential in education, community, Jewish law, Torah study, advocacy, healthcare, technology, politics, and more. Joanne's latest episode, episode 42, is an inspiring interview with Rachel Sharansky-Danziger. And this coming week, she'll be releasing a wonderful episode about Israel education that relates to Pesach as well, with Sarah Gordon. Step into Women's Gallery to hear what happens when women bring their full selves to the center of Jewish life. Follow Women's Gallery on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, or look for a link in the show notes.
I do not think that American Jews see this as you guys are taking a hit for us. It is in the short term making things more dangerous for us. And I think that is a very important point. It is raising antisemitism in this country. That is playing out in very real ways. And that does not mean that it is an unjust war. That does not mean that the Israeli government shouldn't do it. That does not mean that the American government shouldn't support it or that I don't support what is going on at all. At all. But it does mean that we are in a moment, and I've thought about this so much, when sometimes the things that are making Israelis safer are making American Jews less safe, and vice versa.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is The Orthodox Conundrum. This is The Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. The genesis of this episode is a Substack article that I wrote on March 12th, and for which I received a decent amount of feedback. I think the best way to introduce this episode is simply to read that article, and then to bring you into the wide-ranging and fascinating conversation that picked up where the article left off. The article is entitled, "We Want to Be Seen." I write this short piece with mixed emotions. Above all, I'm afraid that I won't articulate my point accurately because I'm having a hard time articulating it to myself. I wanted to express my, I'm not sure, dismay, surprise, frustration, at what seems to be a broad disinterest in the welfare of average Israelis during this round of fighting against Iran and Hezbollah. Of course, I have friends and family members who reach out to me and other Israelis regularly. I know of public figures who are tirelessly working to support U.S. armed forces and the IDF in the face of extensive criticism from talking heads on both the left and the right. There are, that is, many people who feel personally invested in the current situation and who obsessively check in on their loved ones in Israel and do what they can to help. Others, however, seem to care less now than they did in the past. This was brought home to me when I listened to certain important Jewish podcasts which completely ignored the current situation in Israel, not even bothering to compose a hastily recorded or written statement that this podcast was produced before the current war with Iran. We pray for the success of Israel and the United States in their fight against tyranny. Some, of course, did just that, yet many others didn't. How do you think that makes Israelis feel? I did not know whether people in the United States would even know what I'm talking about until I read Michal Biton's latest Substack post less than an hour ago. She wrote, "I'm still reading the news obsessively, but I've noticed something in myself and in the American Jews around me. Good, Israel-loving people. We are checking in less on our Israeli friends and family than we did in the aftermath of October 7th, less than during the Iran war last June. I'm not the only one to have noticed it. This morning, EJP's Judah Ari Gross covered this as well, writing about how, quote, funders and nonprofit leaders in Israel are describing a marked drop in engagement from their diaspora counterparts during this round of fighting against Iran and its proxies, compared to similar conflicts over the past 2+ years, end quote. Michal continues, I've been trying to understand why. Is it compassion fatigue? The problems in our own backyard pulling at our attention? Is it the distrust that some American Jews have in this current U.S. administration? Is it a belief that Israelis are resilient and strong? Or have we developed a certain quiet acceptance that missiles are falling on our friends and family who are huddled in shelters that protect them, that the emergency 6,000 miles away has become the weather? When reading Michal's words, I finally felt seen and understood. Let me be clear, we are not victims, and we would hate to be seen as victims. Israelis are resilient and strong, and we are proud that we are directly involved in confronting terrorist-loving tyrants. We would want nothing less. We Israelis, I believe, see ourselves as doing the dirty work that helps both Jews across the world and the West in general. Jewish people outside of Israel may scoff at this and declare that we are doing no such thing, and dismissing that belief is their prerogative. That does not change our perception, however, that we are running into our shelters so that you won't have to do the same sometime in the future. Part of this, not indifference exactly, maybe habituation, can actually be seen as a type of compliment. Israelis are made of strong stuff, I hear repeatedly, and that's true. It's also true that few of us have had a good night's sleep in 2 weeks because we are regularly awakened by the jarring tone of phone alerts and the spooky sound of air raid sirens. It's also true that individuals who are in school or working have been called back to the army and now are guarding our borders and withstanding attacks from Lebanon. It's also true that many of our children are again living, albeit temporarily, in one-parent families, as Abba was called back into the army yet again. It's also true that our kids don't have school, that our babies don't have daycare, that we're working remotely and with fewer hours, making less money even as our expenses, if anything, have gone up. It's also true that going to the supermarket or to shul means wondering if you're going to end up breathlessly knocking on a stranger's door to ask for shelter when the missiles start falling. We're proud that we stand tall in the face of Iranian and Hezbollah missile attacks. And along with that pride comes exhaustion, frustration, and fear when a missile falls within sight of your house. And last week, 9 people in Beit Shemesh were killed by an Iranian missile, even though they were in a shelter. It's scant consolation to tell yourself that Israelis are strong. It's even less consolation when so many people who care about Israel seem to consider this nothing worth noting, something that, as Michal said, has become the weather. And it's more interesting for them to talk about the Pesach program they're promoting without even acknowledging the crazy existence we're living through today. I write these words in order to open a conversation, not to lay down a definitive characterization of Israeli or American attitudes. Perhaps I'm wrong on all counts. Perhaps I'm simply looking in the wrong places. Perhaps I'm not. Let's strengthen the bonds that unite Jews in Israel and across the world, because right now, those bonds seem looser than they were in the past, and Israelis have started to notice. I wrote that article a week and a half ago, and today I'm honored to widen this conversation. I welcome my friend Rabbi David Fine back to the podcast, along with Dr. Laura Shaw-Frank, who is the American Jewish Committee's Vice President for Education. Our discussion was so interesting and worthwhile, and as both of my guests suggested, it represents a model of how we need to talk to each other instead of talking past each other. We'll get to that conversation in just a moment. First, remember to subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate it and write a review. Continue the conversation on Facebook by joining the Orthodox Conundrum discussion group. Finally, the best way to promote your organization, your business, or yourself is to create a high-quality podcast, and JCH Podcast Productions can help you make that happen. Whether you want to learn how to start your own podcast or want to improve the podcast you already produce, we will make it happen. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com, and let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. Dr. Laura Shaw-Frank is Vice President for Education at the American Jewish Committee and Director of the AJC Center for Education Advocacy, where she leads efforts to ensure that American educational institutions actively confront antisemitism, embrace Jewish identity, and promote critical thinking and fact-based inquiry. A scholar practitioner who bridges academia and advocacy, Laura brings deep expertise in Jewish history, Israel education, and educational leadership. She earned her PhD in Jewish history from the University of Maryland, College Park, and holds undergraduate and law degrees from Columbia University. Before joining AJC, Laura practiced as a corporate litigator and held educational and administrative roles at Yeshivat Maharat and SAR High School. Laura lives in Riverdale in New York City with her husband, Rabbi Aaron Frank. They are the proud parents of 4 young adult children and delighted grandparents to their grandson. Rabbi David Fine, founder and dean of the Barkai Center for Practical Rabbinics and Community Development in Modi'in, Israel, is training a new generation of communal rabbinic leaders in Israel while mobilizing over 5 million shekels in humanitarian aid for soldiers, widows, and families affected by the current crisis. Before making Aliyah, Rabbi Fine served as spiritual leader of congregations in Milwaukee and Kansas. He and his wife, Julie, a school psychologist, live in Modi'in and are the parents of 4 sons, 3 of whom serve as combat soldiers in the IDF, and 3 grandsons. Rabbi Fine is very involved in many initiatives to assist Anglos living in Israel, as well as efforts to increase Aliyah from North America. He is the host of the Defining Moments podcast and was a candidate for the 25th Knesset. Rabbi David Fine and Dr. Laura Shaw Frank, thank you very much for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
Great to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good to be here.
As I mentioned in my introduction, we're going to talk about engagement outside of Israel, in particular in the United States with Israel, given the current war and what sometimes feels to people in Israel like a lessened sense of engagement or emotional attachment than there was in the past. Let me make it very clear. This is not something I know objectively, and I'm also not trying to argue that people care less, which I don't believe. I just feel that sometimes it feels that way to some of us in Israel, and I'd like to explore what that means. So I'm going to open up with a question to both of you. Laura, we'll start with you. Do you think something has actually changed in the way that American Jews are currently engaging with Israel or not?
I don't know if it's changed. It may be shifting. I read your piece with a lot of interest, Scott. I thought it was actually very on point, and I felt like, wow, maybe I didn't really tune into this so much. But it does feel actually the case that there is less hyper focus on what's going on in Israel. The fact that Israelis are sitting in shelters and are really struggling to sort of keep their heads up and going about their business in this moment. And it was interesting. Once I started paying attention to it, of course, everything was in that lens. So, of course, yesterday in Shul, I go to a modern Orthodox Shul in Riverdale, Young Israel of North Riverdale. Yesterday in Shul, our rabbinic intern spoke about the experience of Israelis going to shelters. I had Shabbat lunch at my house, and a friend of mine was at Shabbat lunch. Her son lives in Israel, and all we were talking about was the experience of Israelis in shelters. And so it kind of felt like I was getting, I don't know, poked a little bit with respect to this question. But I do think that there's something a little bit different. And I think that I'm sure we'll get into sort of the reasons behind it, but I do think that American Jews are feeling a sense of being torn about understanding the scene here in America and understanding the scene in Israel. And what I mean by understanding the scene in America is this is not an overwhelmingly popular war here in the United States. Among Republicans, obviously much more so. But overall, the president is underwater with respect to this war. Gas prices are at sky-high levels. He has not made the case to the American people as to why he should be in this war. People are really worried about World War III. And the Jewish community is a totally different headspace because we're worried about Israel, and Iran has been the thorn in Israel's side for decades and decades and decades. And it's a hard time to be an American Jew. There's a ton of antisemitism. There's a ton of blaming Jews for this war that's going on now. And I think American Jews are feeling a sense of malaise, like unease about this moment. And that maybe spilling over. I do think that the Orthodox community is different. There's so many touch points between the American Jewish Orthodox community and the Israeli community. We all have kids there, nieces, nephews, parents, cousins, aunts, and uncles. And obviously that changes things, but that's sort of my initial thought.
Let me add to that we easily could reverse the question and say, do Israeli Jews care enough about what's going on in America? I understand that's a fair question to ask as well, given the anti-Semitism. I happen to be framing it the other way, but I don't deny that what you mentioned is an important question to address as well. Before we move forward, David, let me ask you what your opinion is about the same question.
I would say that I feel things have changed very much, like you wrote in your piece, and I think like Michal wrote in her piece that you quoted. Again, I'm not at all laying any blame or judging anyone. I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think that I feel that my friends and family reached out to me, much more after October 7th and the months and even years following that. And I think there are a lot of measures that show, meaning I think you quoted also the giving is down. I think, like Laura's saying, that, there are, I guess we could have theories about this. We don't know the reasons for sure, but I also agree that what's going on in America is much more complicated than what was going on, when October 7th happened. So it's certainly easy to understand. But like you said at the beginning, I think that sometimes it feels like, people don't care, even though we know on an intellectual level that they do, and that is ridiculous. So, but I think things certainly have changed.
Well, let me ask you then, David, because you mentioned that giving is down and you've been very involved in fundraising for Israel over the past few years. Are there any specific examples you could mention, or at least instances where that's become manifest?
I don't want to necessarily give any specific examples for fear of outing people. But in general, I think that I'll tell you, I'm on a group of many fundraisers for Israeli organizations, people all based in Israel. And we've been talking since this war started on Shabbat Zachor that people are just not really paying attention to the things that we're sending out, to the asks. And if you compare that to after October 7th, it was like flooding, So my own giving, not my own giving, but you said that I've been raising money for Israel in general for different projects, but my own collecting for my own organization, for Barkai, people don't seem to be paying attention right now to that, which is very unusual for pre-Pesach. And one would think that the war that just started now with Iran would raise the giving, not lessen it. So it's a bit surprising.
Okay, Laura, I want to ask you again about your experience over Shabbat. You just mentioned how the rabbinic intern talked about our topic, and at the Shabbos table, you talked about our topic. What exactly does engagement with Israel feel like now in the United States? In other words, you acknowledge that it might be somewhat different, but you also say that it clearly is happening on some level. What is the nature of such engagement if, for example, as David says, it's not necessarily manifested in increased giving to Israel, which is only one measure? In what ways do you see engagement with Israel, and how is it manifest?
Well, I work at American Jewish Committee. I'm the vice president for education there, and I oversee all of our work in education spaces, K through 12 and higher ed. And our organization has been extremely, extremely vocal and on it with respect to this war, supporting the United States' support of Israel in the war and engagement in the war. And so I think that the Jewish, like, sort of what my son calls big Jew in kind of a sarcastic way, is very, yeah, I like it too. I use it all the time. I do think that the big Jewish organizations have spoken out very clearly in support of Israel, in support of destruction of Iranian capabilities, in support of regime change, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. I think there's been very firm statements coming out of AJC. You can look on our website and see that I think they've been very firm. So I do think that, like, the big Jewish organizations have spoken pretty clearly in this moment. I think that, look, we are really reeling here in the United States with respect to what happened in Detroit. I'm sure that is something that you all have tuned into. What people don't really know about that is that the shul was basically destroyed. This truck or whatever he was driving kind of was on fire in the middle of their shul. Their Torahs were safe, their children were safe, but the shul was destroyed. And obviously, it's one shul, and we have 7 million Jews in America. And what you guys are going through and being in shelters every second, and believe me, I came out of Shabbat, and the first phone call I got was from my husband about the attacks that happened. Now I can't remember where they are, which is
Probably Arad and Dimona, yeah.
Arad and Dimona, that's right. And I realize it's one shul. It feels very, very huge to the American population, the Jewish population. So I think there's a lot of focus on that. I think there's a lot of worry about that guy. I can't remember his name. You can see I don't remember any names anymore. That's just the age I'm at. Who resigned from the Trump administration using anti-Semitic imagery, saying that he refuses to have any part of Trump's war. There is a lot of sort of trolling that's going on in social media with respect to, like, the Jews dragged Trump into this war, Bibi dragged Trump into this war, Israelis dragged Trump into this war. So what the engagement looks like is, I think publicly, there is a very strong face of the Jewish community, sort of in its unifying voice. It's sort of the public voice. And with individuals, there's, again, this sense of malaise. And I do think it's probably different with respect to people who have close family and contacts in Israel. But that's what I would say. I would say organizationally and individually, it's probably playing out differently.
Yeah, I believe you're referring to Joe Kent, I think was the person's name that you're talking about, who just resigned.
Exactly.
Right.
That's his name.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to mention two things. I'm not going to say that they epitomize the issue, but I do think they may embody it or demonstrate it to a certain degree. Admittedly, things might change only because, unfortunately, these tragic attacks last night in Arad and Dimona, and today, we're recording on Sunday, a person was killed up north by Hezbollah. There were people who were injured in Tel Aviv. For whatever reason, the numbers of casualties have gone up dramatically over the past few days, which might change the way people think about this. Nevertheless, the two things I'm going to mention are two essentially social media posts. One of them was one that my daughter mentioned yesterday. My daughter is 19 years old. And she said, the OU just came out with a statement after Shabbos. Reese's Pieces are now pariv. Apparently, that's very big news. I saw someone else wrote in the Times of Israel about that. And I'm not saying the OU shouldn't announce that. There seems to be a bit of disconnect that the big news after Shabbos, on a Shabbos when, as we know, all this was going on. Admittedly, this might have been released before that, but still, the feeling of, oh, wow, there was a missile that landed in Arad, an apartment block was destroyed, tens of people seriously injured. But hey, guess what? Reese's Pieces are pariv. I realized there was no disrespect intended. Obviously, this was known before Shabbos, and it was prepared before Shabbos, and the OU did not know what would happen on Shabbos. Nevertheless, it was somewhat startling, this disconnect between what we're thinking about in Israel and something the OU felt the need to announce. The second social media post was something sent to me by my good friend and Intimate Judaism co-host, Tali Rosenbaum, from, I believe, an organization called Greybold. To the best of my knowledge, this is not a Jewish organization. It's an organization that gets Americans out of danger zones. So kol hakavod to them. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a very good thing. But in this particular social media post, or several of them, they were showing Israelis, or not really Israelis, excuse me, Jewish people who are being evacuated from Israel and saying, thank you so much. It's so scary in Israel. We're going to America. Yay, great, but we're leaving Israel. And the feeling was, I understand. I'm not saying that people who are here, who are Americans, need to stay. They're not contributing by being here. I recognize that. Yet the celebration of, yay, I got to leave. Thank you, Greybull. Donate to Greybull. And their tagline was, don't be a spectator, donate now. And I thought, oh, man, this is exactly what the people who are leaving are doing. They're saying, we'd rather be spectators. We don't want to be living history. We want to watch from 6,000 miles away. I understand and respect it, but it feels the strange disconnect. And I don't know even why I'm mentioning this so much, just to throw out, these sort of show that kind of disconnect that I'm talking about. David, do you agree with me in what I'm sort of implying here, or do you even understand what I'm trying to say?
It seems tone deaf sometimes. Again, I'm not accusing anyone of having any intentions that are negative or to hurt people. But sometimes people, just don't realize that their language is not helpful. I didn't know about the Reese's Pieces thing. I'm actually happy that Reese's Pieces are part of it. Thank you. But with the Pesach plans, I think you're 100% right. When people talk about being stuck in Israel and, people have to go on rescue flights, right? So I had a conversation with somebody who said, well, what's the big deal? Like, we are stuck, meaning we were supposed to go to America and now we're in Israel. So it's not a negative word. It just happens to be a fact, right? So, I said, look, this is a little bit of an introduction I need to give you. I was a pulpit rabbi for many years. And when, let's say a couple came into my office that were fighting and having marital problems, I would usually refer them to mental health workers. But I would see them once or twice before just to get an idea and know who to refer them to. And so they would say, he said, she said, he said, she said. So I would always say to these people, I don't care about the facts, right? I don't care who's right. It is meaningless to me. I care about one thing. I care about how you made the other person feel. That's okay. That's all, right? And so, yes, you could look at a dictionary and say stuck means this or stuck doesn't mean that. But when it comes down to it, if it's hurtful to people, then why use it and why get into that? I'll just end with, I was outside of Kibbutz Be'eri on Thursday. And as we all know, Kibbutz Be'eri was one of the most destroyed kibbutzim. If you haven't been there, I mean, it's almost indescribable. And so many people have been going to Kibbutz Be'eri since October 7th. And there's a sign outside. It says, B'shvilenu zebayet, right? Meaning everyone comes, they see it. It's heartbreaking. It's sad. But then they leave, a half hour later. But the people that live there, that's their home. And so I think that some extra sensitivity, even though I said at the beginning that no one has any negative intentions, I think people do have to be aware and have some extra sensitivity.
I agree with that. Laura, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, if I could, yes. So I have a niece who's spending her gap year in Israel this year on Chavruta, the Hartman Gap Year program. She's having an amazing year, even as she's been in and out of shelters quite a bit the past few weeks. Pesach is our family holiday. It just is. Everyone's together. My mother is turning 87 this summer. She's in okay health, not great. And my niece wants desperately to be at our Seder. It has nothing to do with leaving Israel. In fact, the reason that she's not going to leave, if she doesn't, is because she's desperately afraid of not being able to get back in. And I hear that on repeat from parents here whose kids are on gap year programs in Israel. But I do think that there's a piece of this. And, I don't know the language that people are using online. It would be very interesting to sort of study it. But there is a piece of this that is, the timing of this is very hard for American families whose kids are in Israel for the year. Again, this is disproportionately the Orthodox community, obviously, but not only. Families who were looking to be reunited. The truth is, the original plan is my sister and brother-in-law and other niece, were going to be in Israel for the Seders and for Pesach. Their flight got canceled, and they're not afraid to go. They're totally fine going, but they can't get there. And now my niece can't get out. And I have family in Israel. She's fine. She'll be fine. But there is a sense of heartbreak about that, about these moments that we can't get back. I also think, I'll just speak very personally on my end. I would never post anything like that on social media, not ever in a million years. I barely post on social media anymore because it's just so fraught. But I am dealing, there's so many little impacts of this war that affect us in very, very different ways than they affect Israelis, of course. But I'm supposed to take 4 delegations of educators to Israel this summer: university presidents, university deans, heads of independent schools, and presidents of community colleges. Those people have an impact on literally millions of Americans. And I'm not going to be able to bring them. And they're all pulling out one by one by one. They're pulling out. And
Are they Jewish or not necessarily?
No, then almost none of them are Jewish. Almost none of them are Jewish. That's the whole point, right? We're bringing non-Jews who've never been to Israel before, who have thousands of people in their orbits who are able to set policy. And these trips are incredibly impactful. And they're going up in smoke. They're going up in smoke. And I think, I would never share that on social media. I would never talk about that. Of course, I'm talking about that here on the podcast, but it's very, very difficult, that piece of it on the American side. Again, it doesn't compare to knowing that a missile is about to land on your home, perhaps, or kill somebody you love. But it does impact the way that we are seeing this moment. I'll just say one other thing. So my friend who was over for lunch yesterday, whose son lives in Israel, she said, this is so interesting, and I really would like to hear what both of you have to say about this. She said, I've been in touch with all my friends and family. She has a lot of family in Israel, a lot of family. She has first cousins. She has nieces and nephews. She has her son. She has a lot of family. She's like, every time I call them, I'm like, are you okay? Are you okay? They're like, ugh, please, we're fine. We're always in a shelter. We're totally fine. Stop calling us. I mean, you can call us, but like send us funny memes. We're totally fine. And that was fascinating to me because, that was another like sort of really like disconnect in the way that we understand each other. Like, I have to say, one of my things that I've been doing constantly now on repeat is I keep on watching funny reels from Israel, like things that are going on in shelters, like shidduchim going on, or like people making fun of what's going on in shelters, or like that app with that thing that they keep repeating with the fake Iranians, or like, okay, wait till that woman is about to go to the grocery store. Now, we're going to start the siren. And I've been watching those to try to like understand the Israeli mindset. And I actually said to David the other day, like the Israeli sense of humor in this moment is unbelievable. It shows such resilience. But there's a disconnect for us because we're like, oh my God, you're at shelters. And they're like, yeah, we're fine. So I think that also impacts the way we interact.
Laura, I think that's such an important point. I'm so glad you said that. And I'm curious what David's going to say about that. Let me first comment about something you said earlier, just to make sure it's clear. I don't fault anyone for wanting to go back. That's not what I mean. It's more the celebration of the fact of, yay, we left. It's that attitude that sometimes bothers me on social media of, we were in this terrible war zone. It was the language, I think. I think David's language of calling it tone deaf was the issue more than the attempt to get back, because of course there are good reasons to go back. I'm not one of those people who says that everybody must make aliyah. I'm not one of those people who says no one should ever leave Israel for any reason. That's not where I'm coming from. It's more the tone deaf nature in this moment that I meant. Your second point is something which is fascinating. And on a personal level, I feel the exact same way. The last thing I want is to be looked at as a victim. I am not a victim. There are some victims, but the vast majority of us are not victims. Our victimhood is that we don't sleep enough, that we're getting woken up in the middle of the night, but we're by and large safe. We're by and large fine. The reason that I have a cold is probably because the whole family was stuffed into our house. I wasn't sleeping enough. That's my war injury. Halavai, that should be everybody's war injury. So we're not victims. So I think that's important. So the fact that people, I'm sure you're right. The fact that people do say, oh my God, are you okay? And we say, please stop with the histrionics, stop with the drama. We're fine. That, on the other hand, is not the same thing as saying, okay, good. Now post about the fantastic Pesach programs you're going on as if this doesn't even exist. And I would say that the first time I really thought about it was the day after it began, when podcasts started coming out, well-known religious Jewish podcasts, and that's my space. So I look at some of them, and I was surprised that there was no disclaimer at the top. This was recorded before the war. We wish everyone in Israel the best. Something as simple as that. And then the next week, it still didn't happen. And it still didn't happen. And while, of course, there were some podcasts that very much did pay attention to the situation, what got my attention was a large number that didn't. It was not so much that we need people to treat us like miskenim, like we're victims, like, oh, poor you, poor Israelis, but acknowledge that something really, really big and historic is going on here, that it's not easy, even if it's not literally dangerous most of the time. And that to me was more of it, rather than, I think there's something in the middle, than you are terrible victims and everything is fine. That's how I see it. How about you, David?
I don't believe I'm a victim in any way, shape, or form. On the contrary, I believe that I am, helping Jewish history move forward. I have three sons who were and are combat soldiers, who are combat soldiers, and have, at the beginning of the war, I had three sons, fighting in this war. And for much of the war, I did have that. And while obviously we're very afraid, when your son's in Gaza or your son's in Lebanon, on the other hand, there's nothing that I have ever had more pride in my life than my sons in the army. So obviously we're afraid, and we pray for them and we worry about them, but we're very, very happy, like I said, that they're moving Jewish history forward. So I do not feel like a victim in any sense of the word. Making Aliyah was the best thing that ever happened to me, and there isn't a close second rather. So I'm very, very happy and to be here at this special time in Jewish history, no matter the danger and whatever else it may be. I just disagree with both of you in one sense. And that is that when people reach out to me, I very much enjoy it, even though I'm also okay, right? I don't necessarily need it, but it definitely feels very, very good. And I think, someone that is calling you or reaching out to you in order to show concern and care, I think that should be celebrated. I'll just say one last thing. I explained to people when they asked me about this, and I showed your article to a few people, Scott, and some of them got upset at me. I say this to some people. It's amazingly simple to do this, right? I actually gave this talk to rabbis around 2 years ago. There's a rabbi. I guess I could say his name. His name is Rabbi Wes Kalmar. He's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I also was in Milwaukee. We weren't there at the same time. Anyway, on Friday, October 13th, I think it was, right? The first Friday after October 7th, he sent me an emoji, hugging me and all that. And since that day, there has not been one Friday, not one Erev Yontif where he hasn't sent me something like that, right? I called my talk something like the amazing significance in seemingly insignificant deeds, right? And again, do I need it? But to know that there's a busy rabbi who's preparing his sermons and drashas and shiurim, who takes out 1 second to show that they're thinking about you, it goes a long, 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 long way.
And I'll just say once again, I don't disagree with you at all. I don't think we're disagreeing. I don't like being treated as, oh, you miskenim, but of course, reaching out is a wonderful thing. I don't discard that whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't think that my friend is talking about reaching out to Israelis like miskenim. It was more reaching out like, oh my God, like you have bombs falling on your head. How you doing? How you holding up? I mean, my family group chat, I have 3 out of my 6 first cousins are Israeli. And my cousin, my niece is there, and my aunt, and whatever, lots of people. And, we have a lot of banter that goes back and forth of us checking in with them and saying, how's it going? How are the sirens going today? And we're not treating them as miskenim at all, but it's like, just want to see how you're doing. We know you have little kids. We know things are rough. Anyone get any sleep last night? Like, that's a common thing. Any sleep last night? So I also want to make a point that I've heard many times from a really amazing guy named Van Jones. I don't know if you are familiar with Van Jones. He's a CNN commentator and a very big proponent of strong Black Jewish relations, and he's just a really very, very special man who wears a blue square, that blue square Alliance Against Antisemitism, on the air all the time. He wore a yellow ribbon on the air all the time. So real ally to the Jewish people. And I've heard him speak a couple of times, and he says that it's really important for us to recognize that people live in entirely different universes online. You could be sitting next to somebody and you think that you have so much in common with them. They're your neighbor, and they're literally living in a different planet online. And I just want to name that, because none of the things that you're saying are on my feed. None of them. No one is saying, thank God I'm out of Israel. No one is saying, oh my God, I can't believe I was in a war zone and now I'm not. I did get the Reese's Pieces many times, and I hear the tone deafness about that. Totally with you. But what I'm seeing on my feed is, a cascade of, Israelis writing funny things about being in the war, and also terrible things about being in the war. I'm seeing a cascade on repeat of the pictures that temple in Bloomfield, Michigan finally released of what happened in their synagogue. That's probably like every 5th post I get is those pictures. We're living in different online universes, and that's so important. There is no one world online anymore.
I could just comment on that, because Scott, at the beginning, you said you could shape the direction in the other way. And I remember you had somebody, I won't mention their name, on this podcast, a few months after October 7th. I don't remember the exact timing. And they said, well, there's so much anti-Semitism going on in America, and none of my friends have reached out to me to, ask me how hard it is or whatever, it may be. And I think that it does go in both directions, meaning, again, based on what I said before, it doesn't matter whether somebody thinks, well, we're like people here are getting killed every second and we're running into shelters, etc. Like, oh, anti-Semitism. But again, it doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters how we make people feel. So if that person feels that they want to be reached out to, then we should be reaching out to people, in terms of the anti-Semitism that's going on in America as well. Now, sometimes, it's hard to do that here when everything that's going on is going on. And sometimes it does seem a little, silly to compare the two. But again, it doesn't matter what the truth is. We're here to try and care for each other. And, the extra smile, the extra emoji, the extra phone call that we're usually not aware about, if we were aware about it, would go a very long way.
Okay. I really appreciate that, David. Thank you for saying that. I want to mention maybe a difference between reaching out to the United States versus reaching out towards Israel, not on an objective level, but from the perspective of Israelis. This is something which I mentioned briefly in my article, and I want to throw that out as a means to get into the question of why there is perhaps less engagement than there was in the past, if that's true. And what I mentioned was that from the perspective of many Israelis, we would say that we're not just another Jewish community. We are the world's main Jewish community by biblical fiat. And along with that, in terms of what's happening right now, the hits that Israelis and Israel are taking by Iran and its proxies, in particular Hezbollah, are not being done just because this is what we want to do because we want to live in peace. We're doing it on behalf of the world Jewish community. That might sound grandiose, and maybe it's not true, but I think that is the perception, that we're on the front lines, not just for Israel, but for world Jewry. And in that sense, when we take a hit, we're taking a hit, quote unquote, for you, for everybody else out there. That might not be true, but that's, I think, how it's perceived. And that leads me into the question largely about why are some people in the United States perhaps not feeling as engaged or maybe as dedicated to that concept as in the past. Now, Laura, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation a very important point, which I want to get back to, that there's a lot of ambivalence about the war in general. My feeling as a subjective Israeli, as opposed to being an objective observer, is you might say that the United States, not you, but one might say the United States is wrong to be in this war. This is not the U.S.'s fight. This is not a fight that Trump should have done without congressional approval. There are all sorts of reasons one could say it's a bad idea. But now that we're in the fight and that Israel's in the fight too, that doesn't mean that people should have less feeling for the people who are getting bombs rained down on them as a result. So people have argued against me and say that I'm missing the point on that. So let me throw that out as an opening statement to talk about why there might be less engagement and why in particular, in this particular case, why is it that ambivalence about the war means that I might not have the same feelings towards Israel as I did after October 7th when there was less ambivalence. I threw out a lot there, so.
Yeah, that's a lot. Very interesting stuff to discuss. I do not think that American Jews see this as you guys are taking a hit for us. It is in the short term making things more dangerous for us. And I think that is a very important point. It is raising antisemitism in this country. And that is playing out in very real ways. And that does not mean that it is an unjust war. That does not mean that the Israeli government shouldn't do it. That does not mean that the American government shouldn't support it or that I don't support what is going on at all. At all. But it does mean that we are in a moment, and I've thought about this so much, when sometimes the things that are making Israelis safer are making American Jews less safe, and vice versa, and vice versa. And that is a really tough thing to handle as a Jewish people, because I think that there are now more Jews in Israel than there are in America, but not by much. We are the other huge Jewish community in the world here. I mean, forget Europe. Europe, they're really, really suffering enormously with anti-Semitism in ways that I don't think anyone on the screen fully understands how bad it is. But things are not great here. They're not great. And as someone who spends her life working on the Jewish people and working on being an actor in history, actually, and I want to say that I think it's very important that American Jews are also actors in history. And I feel very much so that I am an actor in Jewish history every single day. I am fighting for the Jewish people every single day. And my husband is fighting for the Jewish people all day, every single day. I don't know if we're even conscious, if the American Jews are even conscious of this sort of feeling in our heads. But when I spoke to my friend about it yesterday at lunch, and my daughter, who's here for Shabbat, we all felt that this moment is an uneasy moment. And we are a huge Jewish community, and you are a huge Jewish community. You're a huge Jewish community in our homeland, which is very different, obviously, for sure. But there is this war in the short term is making us less safe.
That is a very, very interesting point. Before moving forward, I'd like you to explain what you meant by vice versa.
Okay. So I want to say this, and I think I've said this to David before. I had this conversation with David before. Maybe, I don't know. I want to say that I think that this is so much about how people feel and not necessarily the reality, to get back to David's point. Okay, so I want to be very clear about that. This is how people feel. Some people feel. I think that some people in America, we got it clear, right? That this is making American Jews less safe because it's raising anti-Semitism. And I think for Israelis, when American Jews maybe try to push allyship in America or building bridges with people in America that Israelis would find anathema, maybe, Israelis might feel that we are endangering them, that we're sort of allowing for a kind of discourse that is diminishing the power of an Israeli discourse that, this is what has to be done and we're going to do it, period. So any kind of sort of building bridges or trying to reach out in a very nuanced and careful way, which is something that I spend my life doing with university presidents, with deans, with heads of school, with education leaders, with elected officials, with all these people. I'll say it like this. When we talk to schools, K through 12 schools, we don't tell them ever that they need to only teach an Israeli narrative. Never. We tell them that they need to teach multiple narratives, that right now they're not teaching the Israeli narrative at all, and they need to put that in there. But we don't tell them that they shouldn't teach a narrative that goes against the narrative that the three of us believe to be true. We don't tell them that. We don't tell universities that they should shut down their protests. We tell them they should have time, place, and manner restrictions, that they shouldn't be endangering Jewish students, that whatever, but we believe in free speech. We believe in, so some of the ideas that the Jewish community refuse it. Some people in the Jewish community are not like this, but, the big Jewish organizations refuse to sort of shut down in the interests of, this is how we're going to move forward effectively here in America. We believe in American values. We believe in free speech. We believe in democracy. We believe in all these things. Those things probably feel in Israel like, what is wrong with you? Shut that down. We can't, of course. But so I think that's the other side. That was a very long-winded way of saying it. It's hard to say.
No, that's really important. I appreciate your saying that. It gives me a lot to think about. And I will say that I actually have been discussing with my wife, Eliza, the necessity of doing an episode on what is the boundary of acceptable discourse. What voices should be allowed in and what voices should basically be said. That's no longer considered okay. In other words, should we say that anti-Zionist narratives within the Jewish community, we have to let people have their piece. Now, freedom of speech does not mean you have to give everyone a platform, but at what point do we say this is essentially heretical? I don't mean that in the religious sense, but in the practical sense. We're no longer going to give this equal place and say this is a fair narrative. At what point do we say it's outside, which is what you're alluding to? At what point do we say this is a narrative which is maybe I don't like it, but I can accept it, and this is a narrative which is offensive and should be outside the pale? That's a much bigger discussion, which hopefully I'll do soon. And I appreciate what you said, Laura. David, how about you? What's your take on what we just said? There was a lot that was said now. I'm curious if you agree with my presumption that Israelis see themselves as the front, not just for themselves, but for the world. So let's start with that. Do you agree with me or disagree with me?
I absolutely disagree with you. I absolutely agree with you is what I meant to say.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's a big change.
I mean, most of my friends, in the United States and colleagues in the United States, definitely, they may not say those words, but I think they definitely agree with that. And again, we're talking about the Orthodox conundrum. So I think that, if I walked into Laura's shul in Riverdale and I said, all things being equal, right? Is it better to be as a Jew, a Torah Jew in Israel, or is it better to be in America? I think that most people would say that it's better to be in Israel. Now, I'm like you, Scott. I do not believe at all that everyone should make Aliyah. I mean, halavai. But I've actually, when people, accuse me of doing that, I tell them that I've talked more people out of making Aliyah than you have. So you could be, you could be quiet. But I think that we have to realize that it shouldn't make us elitist or judgmental, but in the Torah and in the Jewish world that we all believe in, it is certainly, more positive, again, all things being equal, to be in Israel. So I think that there's nothing wrong with people in Israel feeling a sense of pride, a sense that they're doing the right thing, a sense that they're like I said before, moving Jewish history forward, even that they're involved in the redemption. But, and there's a big but here, and that is that it cannot lead to what I said before, elitism and judgmentalism. And unfortunately, in some of our circles, sometimes it does, right? And that's where I think that we start getting into trouble. When I forward your article that you wrote, and somebody tells me that I feel that way, I say, you know what? This is not about me feeling judgmental or elitist, because trust me, I don't. Because you know what? I got to tell you, I have much more better things to do, and I don't have enough time to do them. I don't really care. If you want me to help you make Aliyah, or you need my help, I'm here. But otherwise, I'm not really thinking about those things. So I think that there needs to be a recognition on the American side that, we're all going to end up here in some way, shape, or form in the future, hopefully. And I believe that, and I think you guys believe that. So I think that there needs to be that recognition. We can feel prideful and proud on one side, and people should, I think, in a certain sense, look up to people who are here.
I think that's a very important point. I'll just mention that my wife showed me a particular very religious Hasidic food influencer who was asked on Instagram a couple days ago. This person is building a beautiful house outside of Israel, somewhere in the United States. And someone asked her respectfully, what about Mashiach? How can you build such a beautiful house if you believe that Mashiach is coming soon, which this person professes to believe? And I'm sure she does. And her answer first was, ouch, that's painful. But she then answered it seriously. And her answer was, no one really knows what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. There's so many different shitot. One of the shitot is that Israel will be like Yerushalayim and the rest of the world will be like Israel, and therefore I can stay where I am. I don't want to quote her exactly. And to me, yes, you can find a shita for anything, but I think that she probably didn't first say, which shita makes the most sense to me? Oh, that one. Okay, now I'm going to build a house, as opposed to, I'd like to build a house, and hey, how do I justify it? After the fact, I can now use a shita I find to justify it. I'm not judging her. I don't know who she is. I don't know anything about her except for this one reel, but I think very often people like to, I think it's a bigger problem, which is not really our topic today, but a bigger problem where people, as I said to my son today in the car describing this, I say, Ki b'tselem adam asat Elokim. People like to create God in man's image. First, you decide what you want and then show how the Torah proves what you already believe. And I think, David, that's what you're saying. I think there are too many people who, again, I am not saying, like you, that everyone should make Aliyah. In fact, I don't believe everyone should make Aliyah. I think people shouldn't make Aliyah in certain situations. They're very important things that people like Laura and other people are doing, and we would lose out if those people who are doing those important roles made Aliyah. There are important family reasons not to make Aliyah. There are important parnassah reasons not to make Aliyah. There are important life reasons not to make Aliyah. I am fully on board with that. And I wish people would say, and I acknowledge I can't make Aliyah, and that's probably God's will. That doesn't change the fact that all things being equal, context-free, living in Israel is a value which is better than living in Chutz La'aretz. And I think people sometimes sort of ignore that.
We wanted to just respond to two other points. Is that number one, and I've known Laura and we've been in continuous touch for 47 years. Our politics are very, very different in a lot of ways, and we've found a way to, and we've never really gotten into any scuffle over them. But I would say that I disagree completely with Laura with what you said about the anti-Semitism, meaning if, Hamas attacks us on October 7th and kills 1,200 people and we respond, right? And the next day already we're seeing anti-Semitism so-called caused by, our actions in terms of responding. You know what? I don't really give a what, right? And I'll say the same thing here, right? We all, the Israeli people, if I forget what the polls are, but I'm sure Scott knows that because he always knows that, right? But the unity in Israel about this war, we have not seen that in decades, right? And so we all know, and you said it yourself, that Iran, we all know, is out to destroy us. They've said it over and over again. And I forgot who it was that said, if somebody says that they're going to destroy you and has the weapons, then you better believe it. So I believe in, habat lahargacha, hashkem lahargo. If you know that somebody is coming to kill you, then we have every right, morally, halachically, to get up and kill them first. And if that happens to cause more anti-Semitism, I'm sorry, but, we have to continue to exist. And I wonder, I'll just end with this. I wonder where you know that it's making things worse in the short term. I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree with that. And you could take polls, a week after it happens, or 2 weeks after it happens. But I see signs to the other end as well. And I'll just say one other thing, and that is that what I was saying before about being elitist, and feeling, better than you. I think that something you just said, Scott, I forget what it was, made me think of this, is that we have to remember that there are Laura Shaws in the world, in Israel, right? We have to remember that there are thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even more of people fighting for, Israel in the United States. And in many ways, I don't know, you could perhaps make the argument that perhaps, I don't know, we couldn't continue to exist without them. I hope that's not true. You started out this question a very long time ago by talking about why people are a little bit more tone deaf. And I'm in very good touch with a lot of the rabbis, modern Orthodox rabbis, very close touch since the beginning of the war for all sorts of reasons. And, one of the things that they're doing right now, because I was just at a rabbinic conference in America, is they're working hard to primary people and get people registered to vote. And, the American rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, was not necessarily involved in that, most of his career, right? So I think that we have to recognize that while we do want to be reached out towards, we also have to recognize, and sometimes I think that gets lost, that there are these rabbis that are doing these important things. There are these people that work in all these different organizations that, and we're not aware of that enough. Now, obviously, like I said, there are good reasons, but I think we need to be more aware of that.
Laura, do you want to respond?
Can I just respond to something? Yeah, thank you. So, David, I just want to be clear. And yes, it is true. David and I have literally been friends since we were 10 years old, little kids in camp. I just want to be clear. This is not about, I'm not making a statement that Iran is not a danger. I would be an idiot if I said that. Iran is an existential threat to Israel and the Jewish people. Period. Paragraph. There is nothing else to say.
I don't think you don't agree with that. I'm just saying you don't seem to agree. You said you support the war. Is that once it started? Did you support doing it from the beginning? I mean, we all agree about that. The methodology of how we deal with it is different.
No. What I want to make very clear is what I'm talking about here is feelings. I think that's, and you can't disagree with people's feelings. I will tell you that even as I support this war, full stop. Do I feel a prickle of the hair on the back of my neck now, here? Yes, I do. That doesn't mean I don't support the war. And I think a lot of American Jews feel like that. We're not saying that Iran is not a danger to Israel and to the Jewish people. But we are saying that the rhetoric that we're hearing, what we're seeing on the streets, what people are yelling at us, what people are posting, what people are attacking. I mean, the guy who attacked in West Bloomfield was his relatives were Hezbollah people. Okay. Like, I'm not saying there's anything justified about what he did. Even if his relatives were completely innocent, there's nothing justified about what he did. But I don't think that you can say, sitting in Israel, how things feel here on the ground in America, just the way I can't in any way say how you feel sitting on the ground there in Israel.
I did not at all say or suggest that I know the way you feel or judge you based on the way you feel. You talked about you talked about the fact that anti-Semitism is raised short term by this war. So I'm saying that's also not based on a feeling. That's based on fact, right?
Right. So, I mean, look, do we have data as to whether anti-Semitism has been raised in this moment? I don't think we have data. I don't think we don't have like the baseline before, the baseline after, but we do have some pretty public anti-Semitic incidents that have happened since then. And certainly the rhetoric that I see on X, which I shouldn't be on, but I have to kind of be on for work, has been pretty awful. I don't know if you guys saw and I have no idea if this is anything to do with the war or just anti-Semitism, but I don't know if you saw that a United States postal worker pushed a little Haredi boy,
Rockland County,
a 4-year-old boy in Rockland County, just pushed him to the ground. What?
A little 4-year-old Hasidish-looking kid with a big black kippah.
Yeah, and you know what the kid did? I just want to say this. It was such a beautiful thing. The kid got up And he picked his kippah up off the ground and he put it back on his head. And that was the first thing that he did. It was amazing. It was truly amazing. It was a really little kid. Anyway, so I want to say that. And the other thing I want to say is in terms of what you were saying earlier about people create realities to suit, like philosophical realities to suit their what they're doing, their mitzvot. I lived in Israel for 2 years, and my husband and I were in Israel in the Mandel Jerusalem Fellows program from 2000 to 2002 during the Intifada, Second Intifada. And we planned on making Aliyah, and then my father was diagnosed with brain cancer, and we came back to America because we were like, how do we change our status to Israeli when my father's about to die, which he did. We needed to be here for my family. And so we came back, and we've been here since that point. I changed careers and went into the Jewish community and various other things. But I remember 2 things happened before we left. One thing that happened was I had a friend who's a therapist who was an American Olah. And she said to me, you'd be shocked at how many people use the philosophy of living in Israel as an excuse for why they want to put 6,000 miles between themselves and their families. So I just want to say that I'm not at all intimating in any way, shape, or form that that's the case with the 2 of you. In fact, I know for sure it is not the case with David. I don't know you well, Scott. But I do want to say that it goes both ways, right? I do want to say that. And I want to say something else. Right before we left Israel, our friends had a party for us. We lived in Yerushalayim. Our friends had a party for us. And one of our friends said, she literally said this to us. I'll never forget it. She said, I hope you come back to Israel because God lives here. And I was like, really? God lives only there? Because there's been a diaspora for 3,000 years. And we've stayed Jewish and we've contributed to the Jewish people. And I thought God was everywhere. What? So I say that not to like dig at Israelis at all, but to say that people create realities for themselves that justify the way they live their lives. I do it all the time. We all do it. And I think that part of our divide, the Israeli diaspora divide, which I think is less now than it has been in a long time, this post-October 7th world, even if maybe we're seeing a little uptick now. I don't know. It's hard to know without data. But I think that the Israeli diaspora divide is so rooted in our needs, each of our needs as human beings, to justify our feelings, our worldviews with what we call facts and what we call truisms. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. And I wish that we, like what we're doing right now is actually exactly what we should all be doing much more frequently, which is hearing each other out and remembering that we are one Jewish people and we live and die together in every single way.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I think what you've said now is fair criticism. I think that your idea of people moving to Israel in order to accomplish something else that may not be so idealistic or religious is an authentic phenomenon. How could it not be? The one difference I would argue in this particular case is even if somebody were to move to Israel because they just want to get away from their family for not positive reasons, or let's say they move to Israel because they can make a better parnassa in Israel. Used to be impossible, now it's not so impossible. Right. Let's say they actually could make a better parnassa. Nevertheless, the thing they're doing is something which is not quote unquote against the Torah, or it's something which the Torah looks at positively, as opposed to I'm going to leave Israel and pretend that that's what God wants, and he might want it, but don't start pretending it's better to live outside of Israel. That's the difference there, that in one case it's, well, let me say Shalom Lishma, but it's still doing quote unquote the right thing, again, in that person's case, and with all the exceptions and caveats I made before that not everyone should live in Israel. In contrast, someone who leaves Israel and says, God wants me to be outside of Israel, or God is okay if I'm outside of Israel, as I said, that may be true. The difference fundamentally, though, is that in a context-free situation, going to Israel is a good thing, and going out of Israel is not as good a thing. So therefore, it's a little bit different, I believe. In the latter case, where someone is leaving Israel for, let's say, reasons that are not necessarily lishma, they're doing something shalom lishma, which is not a positive, as opposed to going to Israel shalom lishma, which remains a positive, if that makes sense.
I know we're almost at the end, so I just wanted to say 2 quick things. I think that one thing that we haven't spoken about at all here, and is very important, and maybe a big reason why why you and I and some other Israelis are feeling this way. There is something called compassion fatigue.
You're right. We haven't talked about that, and that's important.
Meaning, there's a reason why, if you go on in Wikipedia or whatever it is, there's an entry for compassion fatigue, meaning it's natural. If somebody's gonna, send bags to Israel with equipment and all that kind of stuff, like, it takes a lot of effort, and some of these people did a lot of that, right? And it's just natural, meaning it's not right, it's not wrong, it just is.
And it doesn't feel good, even if, right? Compassion fatigue is real. And when you're the one who's on the receiving end and it diminishes, it doesn't feel good, even as it is real.
Let me just say the second thing I wanted to say. There's such a thing called awareness, which is simply, what are you aware of? So in Israel, right, you can't drive a block without seeing, and certainly when before the hostages were returned, yellow ribbons. Now you can't go 5 feet without seeing posters and stickers of soldiers that got killed, right? Meaning you can't escape this in Israel literally for 5 minutes. But I was in America many times since the beginning of the war. And again, not right, not wrong. It just is, right? That there's not bombs going off. There aren't people getting killed. There aren't funerals and shivas to go to. So things take place that go on for hours, a day, whatever, it's just all in the background. I think that Judaism requires us to have awareness. Muda'ut is what we call it here in Israel, for all sorts of things, right? God, our fellow human beings, Israel, America, whatever it may be. And I think that all of us have to do a better job. But I do think that some people in the United States need to do a better job of having awareness, because it's not as easy as it was at the beginning. I don't want to end, Scott, without saying this, and that is that when you invited me to be on, I was originally hesitant, and because I thought I may be in a position where I would offend somebody, because somehow I thought, we were better and they weren't doing enough and all that. I really, really, really don't think that at all. And what I see this is not a critique, not a criticism, not an accusation. What it is an invitation to be closer with each other, to have more awareness about what each other's needs are, and to do better. We can always all do better in human relations.
And let me add one thing to what you said. In addition to compassion fatigue, I'm sure there are other reasons as well. There's also something which I think is actually very complimentary to Israelis, which is I've seen so many people outside of Israel say, oh, Israelis are made of something different, of special stuff. They can handle this. Now, I'm not necessarily sure that's true on the average, but it's coming from a place of admiration. Oh, for Israelis, they just go into their shelters and continue with their day, which is true. It doesn't mean we're not exhausted. So on some level, I think there's an element of, and maybe Laura, you haven't seen this, but I've certainly seen it again on whatever social media is being fed to me, that it's coming from a place of Israelis can handle this in a way because we think that they're really cool. There's something very strong about them. They're emotionally resilient in a certain way.
I am getting that in my feed, and sometimes I feel guilty about it because I'm like, I shouldn't be putting that on Israelis, but I do. I get a lot of that on my feed, a lot of it. I think it's because I'm getting a lot of Israeli stuff on my feed.
Okay, we do have to close up, particularly because eagle-eared listeners may have heard David got an alert. He's in Modi'in. I'm in Beit Shemesh. I guess I didn't get it, but his alert means that there may or may not be a siren in the next couple of minutes. So David had a wonderful way of closing by saying that this has to be an invitation to further conversation, to understand each other. Laura, let me give you the last word.
I just want to say, David, you didn't offend me at all. And whatever, I love David very, very much. I hope that I didn't offend anybody. I'm going to say this. This is exactly what we should be doing. Hard conversations are the only way to actually move forward. If we tiptoe around the hard stuff, we're actually not communicating like a family. And we are a family. We are people. And I just want to say a lot of gratitude to you, Scott, for hosting this conversation, and even more gratitude to my friend David for opening the conversation with me and for making the connection between us, because we can't be afraid of hard conversations. And I just want to say that we're thinking of you, and we're praying for this war to be successful and for you to be safe.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate both of you joining us today.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you, Scott. Scott is not a stranger to tough conversations.
I know. I listen to the podcast.
I go speaking a lot, in America, as you know, Laura. And there's sort of like an unspoken rule amongst the people scholars and residents, that we can't talk about Aliyah, for instance, right? For fear that people are going to think that we're judging them, we're here to make them uncomfortable, we're here to make them guilty, right? And I wish for the day that, like you said, that we could all have these hard conversations and realize that the most important thing is Hevei Dana Kol Adam L'Chav Zchut. We're all trying to do and be where we think we should be at that moment in time in order to do the best that we can in order to make this world a better place. So I thank you, Scott. I thank you, Laura. And like you said, let's continue the conversations. You're welcome to come to my mamad right now if you'd like to continue.
Okay, Amen. David, thank you very much. Dr. Laura Straw-Frank, Rabbi David Fine, I appreciate having the conversation. Let's continue it sometime. I'd like to offer a word of thanks to our Patreon supporters. Patreon functions as a voluntary tip jar for Jewish Coffee House and our family of podcasts. Patreon supporters at all levels, as well as paid subscribers to Orthodox Conundrum Commentary, will have access to our upcoming private Q&A sessions. Your support in either place helps sustain thoughtful Jewish conversation. Additional bonus material, including the longer episodes with bonus questions, is available to paid subscribers of Orthodox Conundrum Commentary on Substack. No matter how you choose to support this work, we are deeply grateful. Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. Subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. Check out the link in the description of this podcast to get your free subscription today. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been the Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.